It's Monday, it's 12:15 and we're live in Westminster on the day Boris Johnson's future will be decided. Joining me, Conservative MP Brendan Clark-Smith, Labour MP Belle Ribeiro-Addy, Telegraph Associate Editor Camilla Tominey and Guardian columnist Raphael Behr. Today,
the threshold of 15% of the parliamentary party seeking a vote of confidence in the Prime Minister has been passed. Therefore, a vote of confidence will take place.
And that vote will happen tonight between 6 and 8 p.m.
None of this was happening until there was a fuss over a birthday cake. It seems to me to be the most trivial reason for having a vote of confidence in a great Prime Minister.
Most of what's happened over the last 6 months in Number 10, policy has been set to sustain the position of the Prime Minister, one man, not the country.
If Boris Johnson loses, he'll be forced to stand down as Prime Minister. The booing at the Thanksgiving service didn't help. Labour are now claiming to be the party of patriotism. Are they? So it's happening. The Prime Minister will face a confidence vote later today. Let's have a listen to Sir Graham Brady, the chairman of the 1922 Committee of Backbench Conservative MPs, making that announcement earlier this morning.
The threshold of 15% of the parliamentary party seeking a vote of confidence in the Prime Minister has been passed. Therefore, a vote of confidence will take place within the rules of the 1922 Committee. That vote will take place this evening in the House of Commons between 6 and 8 o'clock, and we will announce the result shortly thereafter. Brendan
Clark-Smith, your reaction?
It was very disappointing that this has had to happen. I don't think it's really necessary. I don't think there's particularly good reason for having a vote of confidence, but I'm sure the Prime Minister's going to win that comfortably later, and he's certainly got my full support.
He has. Belle, what's your response?
Well, I think the public are going to be wondering what's taken Conservative MPs so long. The idea that it's taken this long just to get 15% of them to agree...
Or more, of course.
Or more, to agree that this Prime Minister is doing an absolutely awful job, I think is going to be beyond quite a few people. And the fact that he could still win today, it shows how much contempt they all have. They're all complicit in this if they continue to allow him to be in charge of this country.
A surprise, Camilla, or not?
Well, I think there was a lot of momentum over the weekend. I think, as you've pointed out in your earlier package, Jo, the booing at St Paul's Cathedral on Friday was a low point for many Conservatives who are basically saying... A tipping point in saying, look, if we've got sort of flag-waving royalists who have queued for hours to see the royal family booing Boris, then it's not your typical contingency of sort of left-wing Ramonis. So I think that's problematic. And as we know from the history of the Tory party and confidence votes, whether he wins or not, and I think the evidence does suggest that he will win it, it's by the margin and how harmful it is for him to not have the full support of his party. A colleague of mine, Chris Hope, who comes on here often, was saying Tories are talking about him needing a majority of 80 to match what he won the general election with in order to be safe.
We'll talk about the sort of margin and the scale of any victory that may or may not happen later. But it's true there's a big difference, isn't there, Raphael Behr, between the number, at least 54 people within the Conservative Party have called for this confidence vote, and 180 plus in terms of supporting the Prime Minister and those who would have to vote against in a confidence vote. Brendan Clark-Smith isn't going to do it. Do you think he's going to win?
That's a hostage to fortune, isn't it? I think he probably will. There's, well over 150 front bench Conservative MPs
on the payroll
who've been given jobs by Boris Johnson. Frankly, some of those people are in those jobs because they've been slavishly devoted to the Prime Minister. I think some of their colleagues would question their competence or whether they're actually in those roles for any other reason than that obedience and loyalty, and they might well wonder whether they're going to get any better job anywhere else in politics. So there's a lot of incentives for people to stick with him. The problem is, as Camilla kind of alluded to there, either way now, it's incredibly damaging because you only need 100. If it's in 3 figures, that's an awful lot of people who are voting not on a policy matter, on the character and integrity of the Prime Minister. They think he's an unworthy man to hold that office. And if you've got, just 120 of your MPs who believe that, they're not going to go away. They're not going to change their minds about you. So this is now just an open wound, whatever happens.
Let's talk to our Deputy Political Editor, Vicky Young. Take us through the choreography of what's going to happen today, Vicky.
Well, the Prime Minister has decided that he will address his own MPs. He's going to do that at 4 o'clock behind closed doors. He has written to them all. We're told that he spent more than an hour this morning signing those letters personally, adding a few personal words to those MPs to try and win them round. And he's partly dismissing this, saying that this is a chance to end weeks of media speculation. He talks about the achievements he's had, delivering Brexit, the vaccine programme, talking about the cost of living help, and he's urging them not to focus on Westminster politics. But there are plenty of his own MPs who think it is more fundamental than that, that there is a problem with his leadership. You talk there about his character. One serving minister saying to me that Tory MPs are fed up with being tainted by this Prime Minister.
Oh, Vicky, sorry, you might not have heard me there. How did we actually get to this point, Vicky?
Well, I think it is a huge turnaround, isn't it? Look at it, this huge majority for the Conservatives only 2.5 years ago. Now, there are plenty who say, well, look, partly that was, of course, because of Boris Johnson. He reached those parts of the United Kingdom other Tory leaders couldn't. Some will also point out he was up against a very unpopular Labour leader in Jeremy Corbyn, and that helped him somewhat. But I think, this is partly about Partygate, but it is also about his own personality and some of the criticism. We heard it from the former Treasury Minister, Jessie Norman, saying today that there's no vision, there is no long-term plan. And I think this huge majority the party has got, there are many of them worried that it's being wasted. Others will say, and cabinet ministers are saying it, that this is all still about Brexit and this is about a Remainer plot. But I think that would be, miscalculation on the part of Downing Street if they think it is just that. The problem for the Prime Minister is that the unhappiness is spread across the party from all different wings. The voting starts at 6 o'clock, again behind closed doors. It is a secret ballot, remember, which is also crucial in all of this because you may be on the payroll, you may be a minister. You can do what you like when you get into that room, though.
Vicky Young, thank you very much there on College Green. Brendan, the mood of the party has shifted, hasn't it? When you look at the MPs who have publicly said they put in those letters of no confidence, they come from all wings of the Conservative Party. We've just had in the last hour the government's, the Prime Minister's own anti-corruption champion, John Penrose, resigning his position. It's over.
I don't think so, Jo. And in terms of coming from all wings of the party, there is always going to be a groundswell of people who dislike any particular leader. I think with all political parties, it's healthy to have a debate in there. But there are people who never wanted Boris Johnson to be the Prime Minister in the first place.
But there are plenty who have supported him. Andrea Leadsom, Jessie Norman. I can read you a tweet from him. He was sacked, it's true, by the Prime Minister last year, but he had been a supporter. You have presided over a culture of casual law-breaking at 10 Downing Street in relation to COVID. To describe yourself as vindicated by the report is grotesque.
I've not seen too many Brexiteers in there, I will be honest, but certainly with the new intake, there's a lot of support for the Prime Minister. And I think the way that you've kind of had this dribbling of getting over the line to that number of letters shows how long it's taken to actually get towards that vote of no confidence. And there's actually a lot more support for the Prime Minister than I think people are given the impression of.
All right, you say it's been a trickle or a dribble. In terms of coming after that Sue Gray report, there did seem to be a fairly steady stream after MPs went back to their constituencies. Jeremy Hunt, as we know, talked about as a potential leadership contender if we get to that point. He has tweeted, having been trusted with power, Conservative MPs know in our hearts we are not giving the British people the leadership they deserve. We are not offering the integrity, competence and vision necessary to unleash the enormous potential of our country. He goes on to say anyone who believes our country is stronger, fairer and more prosperous when led by Conservatives should reflect that the consequence of not changing will be to hand the country to others who do not share those values. Today's decision is change or lose. I will be voting for change. Why is he wrong?
Well, politicians talking about themselves is what the public don't really want here. They want us to get on with the job. They want us to tackle the cost of living and so on. And I think if you look at the history of this, when you've had votes of no confidence in Prime Ministers, it's always come after some sort of election defeat or, Boris Johnson has had a very, very successful election 2.5 years ago, an 80-seat majority. I really don't see any reason, really, why he should be deposed now or in the future.
Well, you said just a moment ago that you couldn't see or hadn't seen a list of many Brexiteers who are now coming out against Boris Johnson. You may remember this from January this year from David Davis. Let's have a look.
I expect my leaders to shoulder the responsibility for the actions they take. Yesterday, he did the opposite of that. So I'll remind him of a quotation altogether too familiar to him of Leo Amery to Neville Chamberlain. You have sat there too long for all the good you have done. In the name of God, go.
Well, let's talk to that former Cabinet Minister and Brexit Minister. David Davis is also on College Green. Hello to you. Can we take it from that statement we've just played our guests and our viewers, a statement you made in Parliament not that long ago, that you will be voting against the Prime Minister this evening?
I think that's a reasonable guess, but I do have to talk to my chairman first. But you can draw a logical conclusion, I think.
I mean, there's been a lot of debate within your party about whether Boris Johnson is an electoral asset. I presume you no longer think he is.
No, I mean, he was definitely an electoral asset at the last election. As you've just heard, we got over an 80 majority out of that. And he certainly has an element of his character that appeals to many parts of British people that Conservatives have not been able to reach for decades. So, you know, he had that virtue, but I'm afraid that that's evaporating. It's not the reason, frankly, that I said what I said, but that is evaporating, and we are certainly losing electoral advantage. And if you compare, normally speaking, leaders of the Conservative Party do better than their party in public rankings. He does much, much worse. So from an electoral point of view, he's now not an asset for the party. But that isn't really the reason I said what I said. I mean, my concerns were over, well, Partygate was really a demonstration of the integrity of government. It was also a demonstration of the heavy-handed approach to COVID, where people were stopped from going to see their dying loved ones, that sort of thing. And also, I'm afraid it reflects on the integrity of the government more widely. So, you know, as you've heard from Jessie Norman, really the most mild-mannered of ministers, and indeed very loyal to the Prime Minister, but has come to the conclusion he has in the starkest terms. And I fear many will think he's right.
Yes, well, we read some of what Jessie Norman had said. We have Brendan Clark-Smith, Conservative MP here, who is 100% behind the Prime Minister, and for some of the reasons that you will have heard rehearsed, David Davis. Is this really the time for a leadership contest, if that's what happens, but even for a vote of confidence or no confidence in the Prime Minister in the middle of a cost of living crisis and an ongoing war in Ukraine?
Well, I mean, firstly, when previous leaders have gone, it's typically been in the middle of a crisis. Margaret Thatcher went when we were at war ourselves, not just a proxy war. And so that's not that abnormal. I'm afraid it's the crisis often that engenders it. Secondly, I'm afraid the cost of living crisis, I want rather better response to than we've got from this government so far. We're still the highest taxing government in 50 years. And that's not appropriate in the middle of a cost of living crisis. So there are policy issues wrapped up with this, which I'm afraid don't help the Prime Minister. They are matters that need to be resolved, and he hasn't resolved them. Right.
The likelihood, as you said, is you'll be voting against the Prime Minister later on this evening. If he wins, as many people think, but perhaps by a small margin, should he resign?
Well, I would argue he should. I would say, you know, that if there is not a very, very clear statement of confidence in him, then he should step down or tell us when he will step down. That's broadly speaking what Theresa May did when she actually got a really quite sizable victory in the challenge to her a few years ago. And that's the right thing to do. I think that will be in the interest of the country, in the interests of the party, and frankly, in the longer run, in the interests of Boris's own reputation. Let's not get it wrong. I mean, he has done some quite important things. He's delivered Brexit. It's not perfect, but he's delivered Brexit. He's got us through coronavirus, the major success in this country, unique in the world, on vaccines. That was under him. You know, he has probably been the best of the Western leaders on Ukraine. These are not small things, but frankly, they're not enough to override the feeling of, well, the question of integrity in the government.
Boris Johnson is addressing MPs at 4 o'clock. Will you be there? And is there anything he can say to persuade you to support him?
Well, I'm afraid there is a national security bill being debated this afternoon, and there's a really rather important holes in it which have to be dealt with. So I may not be there. If I'm called before then, yes, I will be. But if not, I'll be waiting to get called in the chamber. No, I don't think, frankly, what we're seeing today, most of the facts that have driven people's decisions, they've been marshalled in the Sue Gray report. They've been marshalled in prosecutions, or rather in fines brought by the police. They've been marshalled in the newspapers, but they've been visible since, as you said, since I spoke in January. I didn't speak ab initio of nothing. These facts were all there, and I haven't heard a proper answer to them in the last several months. I wouldn't expect to get one today.
David Davis, thank you very much there on College Green. Listening to that, Brendan Clark-Smith, are you thinking about reassessing your support for the Prime Minister, particularly on the issue of character and personality rather than policy, although David Davis has problems with that too?
I respect what David says, and others as well, but I respectfully disagree with that, and he listed a number of things that we've achieved there as well, and people want to see us go on and continue and do that and push that success even further. And I really don't think we're talking about a resignation over a birthday cake. You know, I think it's going a little bit far, and really I think people need to get a sense of perspective with this.
Camilla?
Well, I think the most dangerous problem here for the Prime Minister is the fact that there doesn't seem to be a particularly coordinated effort. You've got people from all wings of the party. It's certainly not a kind of Brexit Remain issue anymore. You've got Brexiteers that aren't in support. You've got centrists that aren't in support. You've got all sorts of different bodies of people. You've got some of the military types under Tugendhat. You've got the Jeremy Hunters all coming together. And actually, Downing Street will be really worried about that because they won't be able to necessarily track the factions. That could make the vote tonight even more dangerous for the Prime Minister. And also, clearly, it's not just about the ethics around Partygate, his personality. There's also a lot of dissatisfaction with this lack of Johnsonian vision. What is it he and the government stand for? Lots of Tories that I've spoken to on all sides of the divide are worried about this tax and spend approach to the cost of living crisis. So then you've got a real policy problem thrown in too.
Two things actually to say to that. First of all, it's not really my business to advise the Conservative Party, but I would strongly counsel against saying it's just about birthday cake. It's about people who weren't able to attend funerals of their loved ones or hold the hands of people in care homes who were dying, who then saw that those rules weren't applying in Downing Street. So just say it's birthday cake. I think you're going to alienate more people than you're going to win with that argument. And in terms of the Johnsonian vision, there is an answer to what he represents. What he represents is the idea that you can have your cake and eat it. And that's what he represented in 2019. That's why he was made leader. To sort of, the Johnsonian, the ebullience was meant to sort of, and the bluster was meant to blow away the complexity of government. He then had to do some very, very complicated, difficult things in government around Brexit, but also around the pandemic. And you can't actually have your cake and eat it. Ultimately, you have to make difficult choices. You have to make tax and spend choices. You have to take some money away from some people and give it to other people. You have to build affordable homes on outside someone's window where they don't want it in their backyard. These are difficult choices. He's not temperamentally capable of making those choices, and that's why you have government paralysis. It's about him. It's about Johnsonism, cakeism, and basically it's over, and you can either eke it out for another 18 months or you can make it over tonight. Those are your choices.
Brendan?
I think this is part of the problem, and to be able to get on and do those things, spending months and months on leadership contests and this navel-gazing that we got, or a blue-on-blue war in that sense, won't benefit anybody. And I saw what happened after Margaret Thatcher was deposed, and the party spent years and years fighting there over that. I don't think we need to do that. I think we're a broad enough church. I think that we can actually focus on those issues, and I would much rather we did this than what's actually happening today.
But it can't be one rule for him and another rule for everybody else. That's exactly what's happened. When other people, other staff members broke the rules, they were made to resign because they said it was distracting. Now we've reduced the mother of all parliaments to talking about parties with a few brief breaks to talk about porn and government corruption, when you've handed over contracts to people that you shouldn't because they're Conservative donors. It's become completely farcical, and the public have had enough.
Well, let's get a response then from the government, because we can talk to the Health Minister, Edward Argo. Welcome to you. Edward, picking up on some of those things, we've just heard from David Davis, former Cabinet Minister, Brexit Minister, ardent Brexiteer and supporter of Boris Johnson. And he, as you know, has withdrawn support effectively. He's going to talk to his constituency chairman this afternoon, but he has pulled support. So has Andrea Leadsom, another ardent Brexiteer. So it is all wings of the party that are now moving against Boris Johnson. He's gone, hasn't he?
No, I don't think he he has at all. I have a lot of respect for Andrea, for David, their colleagues, their friends. I just happen, like Brendan, to respectfully disagree with their analysis, which is why I'll be supporting the Prime Minister in the vote of confidence later this evening, and why I'd encourage other colleagues to do so.
If Boris Johnson wins a narrow victory, as many people think he might in today's vote, will he have a sufficient mandate to carry on?
Well, I'm not going to speculate on what might or might not be a margin, what might or might not be the numbers. I think I've done about 200. Well, I was about to say I've done about 200 media interviews in the past 2 years as the health minister, and often the hypothetical question that is posed, I understand why it's posed on a whole variety of things. And I'm not going to be.
It's not really hypothetical. It's going to be happening. It's going to be happening in about 7 hours.
What I would say, Jo, is I'm confident, and I believe the Prime Minister will win this evening. And what he wants to do, what I want to do, is to move on from that vote this evening. Quite rightly, colleagues will have the right to express their view later tonight. And whatever the margin of that, whatever the outcome, we need to be able to get on with delivering for this country, which is what he's been doing throughout, but there's a lot more still to do.
Right, you say whatever the outcome, but it is actually rather important because we don't have to go very far back in political history. Theresa May won a confidence vote 2/3 to 1 in December 2018, and within 6 months she was gone. So history could easily repeat itself, couldn't it?
Well, history sometimes repeats itself, often it doesn't. We've seen the leadership election with Margaret Thatcher, with John Major, with Theresa May, each in a particular set of circumstances at the time. So I'd be very cautious about seeking to extrapolate or read too much into what happened in a particular set of circumstances 3 years ago when we were governing without a majority, effectively, in Parliament at a very difficult time. We've got an 80-seat majority now, so I'd just be cautious about trying to read too much into what happened 3 years ago or even 23, 25 years ago and extrapolating that forward.
Edward Arger, thank you very much for joining us. Let's pick up on this point about the scale of any victory or loss. Let's just take you through a brief history of Conservative leadership votes. We can show you here 1990, Margaret Thatcher resigns following leadership challenge from Michael Heseltine. John Major in 1995 wins a challenge against John Redwood. Ian Duncan Smith as leader lost a confidence vote and then was gone, of course, in terms of leading the party. And as I said, Theresa May, she won that confidence vote pretty strongly and confidently, but then was gone within months. Does the scale of a victory, if Boris Johnson does win tonight, matter?
Yeah, I think the numbers matter significantly. And I think that obviously his backers, I'm sure you'll vouch, Brendan, are looking for a big number for him to carry the party over the line, so to speak. The only thing in his favour, which of course everybody here knows, is this lack of successor argument. So you can look at Theresa May and people were already thinking about Boris Johnson to succeed her, which would have made them more confident voting against her premiership. The candidates that we've so far heard from, the likes of Jeremy Hunt, Nadhim Zahawi, Tom Tugendhat and others, are all untested. And there's a lot of talk in Tory circles about how the cabinet is inadequate and we need big beasts. Well, a lot of the leadership contenders are coming from the cabinet. So who else is there? This is a problem that has perennially plagued the Tory party. Right,
we're going to look at some of the runners and riders if we have time towards the end of the programme. But you were nodding there as Camilla was talking because Sajid Javid, one of the many cabinet ministers who's been out today pledging 100% support, just like Brendan Clark-Smith, but they are also amongst those who will no doubt throw their hats into the ring if there is a leadership contest, if Boris Johnson loses. But so far, Sajid Javid has said that actually any result, whatever the result, I'm paraphrasing here, it will end the frenzy around Boris Johnson's leadership. Do you think that's true?
No, I don't think that is true. I mean, it's worth adding, I think in particular, that the dynamic changed when Rishi Sunak, the Chancellor, sort of politically imploded in terms of his candidacy to be a potential successor. He might be a great Chancellor in some people's views in the meantime. But anyway, his candidacy, I think, in the eyes of many of his colleagues, was undermined by some of the political difficulty he had early in the year. And that's probably drawn this process out a little bit more. But ultimately, you know, if someone comes close... I mean, Margaret Thatcher stood down. She beat Michael Heseltine in the first round, but she stood down because it wasn't a big enough win. Now, to have that sort of attitude, that takes a sort of a magnanimity, a sense of statesmanship, a kind of a sense of honour about whether or not you can continue. These aren't things that Boris Johnson possesses in his repertoire of personality traits. If he wins by one vote, as far as he's concerned, he's won. That's all he's interested in. You know, that's if he can sort of do a dive in the box in extra time and get a penalty, he'll take it.
But his personality won't allow him to go into an election he thinks he's going to lose. He's not going to go put himself through 18 months of hell to lose.
But he will also always think he can win until the campaign, you know, until the very last day.
I know, but he's still enough of a realist and got enough of an ego to not take 18 months of absolute hell to be defeated at the end of it. That is,
if he thinks he'll lose Uxbridge, I think then he'd be...
Yeah, if he loses his own seat, or he thinks he's going to get an absolute drubbing...
Well, that would be an utter humiliation.
I don't think...
But again, this is all about him. It's all about him. We're facing...
Isn't it always about the person in charge?
It shouldn't be.
Look at Corbyn.
We're meant to be public servants. We're meant to be public servants, and instead we're having this discussion about who's going to get to keep their job, and people are going to support the person who they think is going to make sure that they keep the job. Well, people are, you know, putting in letters because they think, oh, it looks bad, I need to jump ship now. Who's thinking about the people of this country? Worst cost of living crisis in a generation. People being taxed more than we've seen for a long time. Look at everything that's happening to us, and still we're focused on this one man and the fact that he just wants to be Prime Minister.
That is familiar territory for Labour, because you had this with Corbyn the whole time, another man who needed to be dragged kicking and screaming from the party that he undermined at the end of the day.
Actually, I think if you'd find that the general public didn't necessarily have as big an issue with Jeremy Corbyn.
They did at the last general election,
the last general election was about Brexit, and this Prime Minister promised to get Brexit done.
We're still a rejection.
But Labour was.
We're still doing Brexit. We're still doing Brexit. We're about to undo it with Northern Ireland, and I'm thinking about the situation that this Conservative Party claims to be a unionist party. They are the biggest threat to the union that I've seen in a number of years.
Will it be right for Boris Johnson to stay if he does only win by a few votes?
Well, it depends. A win is a win when it comes down to it. But I think if you're talking about changing, is that going to solve the cost of living crisis, people's global bills with energy? No, it's not. Is that going to suddenly end the war in Ukraine overnight? No, it's not.
But won't he be a lame duck?
I don't think so, no. And I think, again, with the Prime Minister, I think he will win later. Obviously, if it's a win by a bigger margin, then that's great. I think we spoke about some of the historical reasons. But again, people have won by large margins. It's not necessarily benefited them there. But there are people who've wanted Boris Johnson out of office all the way through this because they resent whether it's Brexit, they resent whether it's the 80-seat majority, the way he's managed to change the Conservative Party and the kind of people that we're reaching. People are scared to death of facing him in an election, and they see this as the way of getting rid of him.
No one's scared of Boris Johnson, and this no confidence vote is just a poison chalice. The issue is, how long is it going to take the poison to kick in? He goes today, he goes next year, he's going to go eventually.
All right.
How much of the country going to have to suffer?
Well, we've been focused so far in the programme on the Conservative Party, because obviously it is up to them and Tory MPs what happens to Boris Johnson later today. But let's talk to Kelly Beaver, Chief Executive of the polling firm Ipsos Mori in the UK and Ireland, about the mood in the country. Hello to you. Did the public move towards Boris Johnson's shift a while ago?
Yes, actually, we started seeing shifts both in the Conservative Party and sentiment, but also Boris Johnson from around early September last year. And it really reached its peak in January, where we recorded some of the worst satisfaction ratings for Boris Johnson himself. But also, of course, we really saw the Labour Party start to make gains at the Conservative Party's expense. So it has been going on for some time, and there's no doubt that the Partygate challenges did start to make the changes in the ratings move faster than we had seen before. So it's not just down to Partygate, though. Of course, there were other areas of discontent more broadly amongst the public too.
Right, and so when we look at the polling, does it give any sense of whether Boris Johnson for the public is still an electoral asset or a liability to the Tory party?
So around 2/3 of people say that they're dissatisfied with how he's doing his job. But interestingly, when you look at what those who voted Conservative back in 2019 think, he still does retain a majority support amongst Conservative Party voters. So you do see that difference. Over half say they want the Conservatives to change their leader, though, before the next election. And he is now trailing Starmer on several leadership traits, things like being a capable leader, being trustworthy and having good judgment. And we are seeing that play out in the overall party ratings. So we have our Ipsos Mori political monitor, and at the minute, the Labour Party are 6 points ahead of the Conservative Party in that.
Now, one of the things that was discussed post the recent elections that we've had is that perhaps the Conservative Party didn't perform as badly as some people had expected, and that Some Tory MPs might have waited to make a decision, not just for the Sue Gray report, but after the 2 upcoming by-elections, and they haven't. But we don't know what's going to happen in those by-elections. What sense do you get by the fact that Tory MPs, enough of them, have seen fit to move now?
So I think looking at the broad picture on the ratings for the Prime Minister, they're not unusually bad for this time in a midterm, to be honest. So when we have a look at it, but there are only a small number of alternatives who in the past have struggled worse than Boris at this stage, so Major and May. We did also have David Cameron, of course, and his ratings were really similar to where Boris's are now, but he was able to turn it around. And I think if you are looking in at the Prime Minister's personal ratings and also what's happening with the Conservative Party ratings, you may be getting a bit more nervous than you were certainly a few months ago. And that may be triggering some of the concern that we're seeing coming through in those votes of no confidence.
Kelly Beaver from Ipsos Mori, thank you very much for joining us. Now, the timing of this confidence vote comes, of course, after 4 days of celebrations for the Queen's Platinum Jubilee. And, in fact, we understand a number of MPs may well have postdated their letters to Graham Brady until after the Jubilee. We can look at some of the glorious pictures, an extraordinary display for the Queen there outside of Buckingham Palace. It was a glittering extravaganza, the fly past there. Colourful street parties too at a very local level, with communities coming together in their own way to take part in the celebrations, and extended bank holiday. This piece was written by Labour frontbencher Lucy Powell in The Observer. As we unite for the Jubilee, let's believe Britain's best days are ahead, not behind. Our values of decency and tolerance and confidence in a secure green future make Labour the party of patriotism now. What do you say to that, Brendan Clark-Smith?
It's quite incredible, really, after a Jubilee weekend. In the past, we've seen Sir Keir Starmer or Lisa Nandy talk about abolishing the monarchy. We've seen Emily Thornberry's comments on flags and so on, and people who really dislike a flag. We've talked about decolonising curriculums and so on. And really, I mean, in another week, we've got 40 years since the Falklands War, and we still have people referring to it as the Malvinas. So, I mean, really, patriotism, I mean, it's not a word I think you can associate with the Labour Party.
I'm sorry. People have got this really warped idea of what patriotism is. It's not about flags. It's not about agreeing with your country in every single thing that they do. It is about these principles of equality. It's about these principles of making the country good for everybody that lives in it. And if that is the case, and if that is what people are saying patriotism isn't, and that's what I believe it should be, then of course the Labour Party are the party of patriotism. I mean, you talk about law and order from the Conservatives. We've got the first Prime Minister to ever be charged with breaking one. So as far as I'm concerned, yes, we are the party of patriotism, but some people don't have the right idea about what patriotism means.
Well, perhaps, Brendan, this was partly responsible for Lucy Powell having the confidence to write a piece like that on behalf of the Labour Party, because we can play the reception that Boris Johnson and his wife Carrie Johnson got when they attended, you were there, I think, the Thanksgiving service at St Paul's Cathedral. Let's take a look. Now, you can hear audibly people booing, some people cheering too, but we heard earlier from Camilla that was, for many Tory MPs, a tipping point, Brendan Clark-Smith. So can you really claim to be the party of patriotism when that's the reception that the Conservative Prime Minister and his wife get when they arrive at a service like that?
Well, I think there was a mixed reaction. I was inside in St Paul, so I didn't actually hear any of it. I've seen various different reports and so on, and I think a few rows in front of me is Tony Blair's, Gordon Brown's, Sadiq Khan's there. I don't think any of them did a particularly great job. I wouldn't boo them on the streets. I think it's a respect thing, and I think this was about Her Majesty this weekend, not about politicians, really. So I think if I would go into one of those events outside, I don't think I'd be booing. I think I'd be a little bit more respectful of that. But I think it's a bit more than just people protesting at events like that. And again, with patriotism, we saw Brexit. How many people wanted this country to fail when we had negotiations with other countries? How many people were on the other side?
It's not quite got it done yet, though, has it?
Yeah, but it's about backing Britain, isn't it? And some people embrace it.
Backing Britain when you've messed it up. That doesn't make any sense at all. Your deal was absolutely rubbish. Boris Johnson's deal was absolutely rubbish. And now Britain is failing on that basis. It's not patriotic or even sensible as a public servant to continue backing something that's not working. That's not patriotism. That's just being absolutely ridiculous.
Well, sorry, go on, Brendan.
But you want your country to do well now. Going back to the referendum, say it went the other way.
But you don't get your country to do well by pretending that it's not doing badly.
Yeah, but I was a big Brexiteer. Now, if we'd have lost that referendum there, I wouldn't want the country to go downhill just to say, oh, I told you so. I want our country to be prosperous. And I think it's very disappointing since Brexit that some people still can't do that.
Are we prosperous now?
We are compared to many other nations as well. We came out of COVID very well. We've got a thriving economy that's actually going to overtake many other countries as well. And
have you seen the recession lately?
Well, you look at our unemployment figures
since the 1970s.
Recession
just at the moment, Bill. But let me interrupt you two. If we just step back a moment, Raphael and Camilla, and think about the article written by Lucy Powell. Think about all of the attempts that Sir Keir Starmer has made to underline the Labour Party's patriotism, obviously trying to put clear water between him and his predecessor, Jeremy Corbyn. And there were many voters who questioned, rightly or wrongly, Jeremy Corbyn's level of patriotism. Is this what the Labour Party has to do now?
I think that's definitely something the Labour Party has to achieve in terms of its positioning for the reasons that you say. I think a lot of people, I mean, I disagree. We heard earlier that people weren't rejecting Jeremy Corbyn in the election in 2019. I think they definitely were, and that very much inflated Boris Johnson's vote. And a lot of that was because of doubts about his patriotism in the broadest sense of just whether he could express natural affection for Great Britain and its history and various other things. But what we've just seen in this argument you had there a moment ago is a demonstration of something very fundamental about the relationship between politics and patriotism. Is politicians don't get to self-certify as patriotic. It's like saying, I've got a great sense of humour. It doesn't work. Tell me a joke, make me laugh. And actually, I think one of the reasons people love the Jubilee, got involved with it, is because it is apolitical. One of the reasons they love this particular monarch, this Queen, who's been around, all of our lifetimes, is because it absolutely transcends politics. Now, so in terms of how you're defining your patriotism, if you're saying it is a political thing that I can animate and get more people to side with me on Remain or Leave, already you've lost the argument, because actually 48% of people voted Remain. That's practically half the country. And actually, there's England, there's Scotland, there's Wales, there's Great Britain, there's the United Kingdom. What is even the unit that you're talking about in terms of patriotism? There aren't any counts.
Wasn't it telling that at an event where we're waving flags for the Queen that people are booing the Prime Minister?
People booed Winston Churchill, people booed Margaret Thatcher, people booed Tony Blair. I mean, that's just politics.
Camilla?
I would say that it might be perceived as patronising to the Red Wall to think that they want Keir Starmer to behave like this. I mean, of course, people remember that Corbyn couldn't bring himself to sing the national anthem at the 2015, commemorations for the Battle of Britain, which was a new low. I would suggest that the Labour Party's bigger problem is the fact that when Sir Keir Starmer walked up the west steps of St Paul's Cathedral, he didn't even elicit a response.
Indifference is worse, is it?
Well, I'd say that that's a problem. I'm not saying that to diminish from the fact that Boris Johnson was booed, but the fact that Keir Starmer strikes the public as so vanilla, they can't even cheer or jeer, I think is a problem.
Setting the bar a bit high, given how many people are walking up those steps. I mean, it would have been an extraordinary thing for a leader of the opposition to elicit
Everybody was being cheered or jeered. Harry and Meghan, the royals, there were loads of people arriving. He turned up and everyone was like, meh.
Are you happy? Are you happy that the Labour Party, and comfortable that the Labour Party and Sir Keir Starmer are wanting to be wrapped in the flag, metaphorically speaking?
We are the United Kingdom. We should be proud of that. But I think this idea that it's all about being wrapped in the flag is not where we're going. I think
what is it then?
Lucy Powell was quite clear about what she was saying. She was saying that, we're talking about equality, we're talking about opportunity for all, we're talking about making this country a better place. That's patriotism, not just the symbols of it. And, as you've heard, apparently for some people, the symbols of it are just ignoring that we have any problems at all.
The symbols are quite important, though, aren't they? I mean, we've seen that in the Mall and indeed across the country with people having Jubilee parties and waving a Union Jack. There'd been this dialogue around it because of Brexit, that it was somehow racist or bigoted or jingoistic to be a flag waver. And actually what it's all about and what we saw this weekend, and as we saw with people said, no one stages a weekend like this. It was pride in what Britain can do. Britain stages great events. The Queen is the figurehead for the very best of Britishness, which is this sense of patriotism that doesn't need to be pejorative. It's just a celebration of our own heritage, which incidentally is really diverse and multicultural. And all the better for it.
Can I just insert one tiny point here? Just like the Conservative Party has a problem in Scotland. They've lost all their councils now in Wales. So in terms of what you're talking about, the Union Jack and the Union flag, what Britain represents politically and what the Conservatives represent in English patriotism and English national identity are actually two different things. And I think the party has a problem there. That's just a political observation, not a comment
because
about
the biggest threat to United Kingdom right now is this Conservative government making all the SNP's arguments for them, messing about with the protocol in Northern Ireland. That's the biggest threat to it.
Would you accept the Union's under threat under this Prime Minister?
Well, we are a unionist party, the Conservative and Unionist party, as we are. And I'm a very strong unionist. I believe in the United Kingdom that involves all parts of that. You know, we're not an English nationalist party, or whatever people say there. We've got members of Parliament all over the country. And this is all about levelling up as well. It's about something that involves everybody. And I think we're the only party that really still pushes that.
All right, just briefly before we go on to the runners and riders, do you think, Camilla, as a long-standing royal observer, that patriotism will be more difficult or change in the era post the Queen?
Well, I think we saw the Cambridges front and centre because there are concerns that, I mean, how do you follow the Queen? Nobody actually can. And therefore, what the monarchy are trying to project there on the palace balcony, particularly yesterday, is this image of 3 generations ahead. It's because they do want the public to have faith that the legacy will be continued. But I think moving forward over the course of the next few months and years, we're going to see some sort of triumvirate, really, of the Queen, the Prince of Wales and Prince William. And actually, I think the public's quite happy with that. Prince Charles and Prince William's people particularly were very happy with the fact that they were shown a lot of goodwill in the Mall as well as the Queen.
Obviously, we don't want to predict the outcome of this evening's confidence vote, but if Boris Johnson loses, these are some of the likely leadership contenders. You're spoilt for choice here. Many of them have already stated their 100% support today in that confidence vote for Boris Johnson, including Sajid Javid and Liz Truss and Dominic Raab. If he loses, who would you fancy, Brendan?
I don't think he will lose, but I think what that does show is that we've actually got a wide variety of talent, both in the cabinet, outside the cabinet, and that's what you need as a political party. You need those big beasts. You need those people with those abilities. So, as they always say, that, you know, nobody's bigger than the club, as they say in football terms. The same with the Conservative Party. You know, one day we will have a new leader. I don't think that's going to be for a long time, because I think the Prime Minister's going to still be in position. But eventually, you know, those values transcend that. I think whoever's leader, that's something that will continue.
OK, well, the result of that confidence vote, I'm being reliably told, will be at precisely 9 o'clock. We love accurate timings in the news business. Raphael, it also shows that there isn't a sort of a favourite necessarily, or a natural successor to Boris Johnson, which we sort of discussed a bit earlier in the programme.
Yeah, although quite often that's the case, in the sense that until you've got the contest, you don't really see how people are going to perform. I mean, who would have predicted that Boris Johnson's first run at leadership would completely collapse, and that, that Michael Gove would stab him in the back, and then Theresa May would end up as Prime Minister, or that John Major would end up as Prime Minister. You know, Michael Heseltine was the heir presumptive. David Miliband on the Labour side was, you know, everyone thought he was a shoo-in. So essentially, you don't really know, and until you start asking the questions. And the thing, particularly in this case, you have this situation where Boris Johnson's candidacy papered over a lot of cracks in the Conservative Party. If you tear that paper down, you've got all these cracks. Who knows where the plaster's going to start falling down?
Well, in terms of plasters, there's Nadine Dorries tweeting about Jeremy Hunt. Your pandemic preparation during 6 years as Health Secretary was found wanting, that was my little link on plasters, by the way, and inadequate. Your duplicity right now in destabilising the party and country to serve your own personal ambition, more so.
Wow. She's not wrong.
She's not wrong. So you agree with her on that? What about
Just
you?
on that.
Well, I mean, the knives are out already. Never underestimate the capability of Tory MPs to destroy each other and sometimes themselves in the process.
Right. Brendan?
Couldn't possibly comment.
Couldn't possibly comment. OK, fair enough. That's all we have for now. I'll be back, of course, tomorrow. It'll be a very busy day post that confidence vote this evening, the result of which we will know by 9 o'clock. I'll be back tomorrow at 12:15 with more Politics Live. Thank you to all of my guests. Bye-bye.